During Jesus' ministry, there were many times that huge crowds gathered to hear him preach. On one occasion, the crowd was so big that Jesus got into a boat and they pushed the boat out from shore a little ways so that the water would amplify his voice and everyone would be able to see him from the shore and the hillside around. On another occasion, Jesus and his disciples tried to get away from the crowds and go into the desert so they could kind of rest and regroup. And so many people followed him out there that he preached to them, and he preached to them and taught them so long that when he was done, he was worried they wouldn't be able to make it back without something to eat. So he did a miracle and fed 5,000 families. On another occasion, so many people gathered around Jesus that he went up into the top of a hillside or small mountain, where everyone could gather around him and everyone would be able to look up and see him and hear him. On that occasion, when Jesus went up to the top of the hillside or the mountainside, he gave a very long message that's contained in Matthews 5, 6, and 7 that are often referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. And the message was so powerful that at the end of chapter 7, it tells us that all the people marveled at the authority and the power of the message, unlike anything they had ever heard from their scribes and teachers. It was unlike anything they'd ever heard from their religious instructors. They were amazed. And the message was not only incredibly powerful and full of authority, it was radical. So radical that Jesus had to say that I haven't come to overthrow the laws. He had to say that in chapter 5. Because what he was proposing was so different from the way that they had been living, and so different from the culture that had developed in their temple, that his message sounded so foreign to them that he had to say, I've not come to throw away the law, but rather I've come to restore it to its full and original purpose. So what was so radical that Jesus needed to say that? Well, it was a message that was the exact opposite of everything that they had been striving after. They'd been striving after being politically powerful, been striving after building an incredibly awe-inspiring temple. They've been striving after fame, fortune, and power. And Jesus came to them and said, happy are those who are poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. Blessed are the meek or the humble. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful and the pure in heart and the peacemakers and those who are persecuted and oppressed. And then he said, rejoice, be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. Jesus was teaching them that happiness, joy, and blessing are not in money, power, and ease. And Jesus taught them that the greatest reward was not here in this life, but in the next. Great is your reward in heaven. The great reward is not here in what you can get and what you can gather. The great reward is in the next life. You see, Jesus taught that we should love people, love God, not love money and stuff. He taught that the kingdom and the reward that we were looking for was one that would last forever. Now, the scribes and the Pharisees, in contrast, they gave a message that was very temporary and very much focused on the here and now, very much focused on externals. When Jesus came, the temple had become corrupt. The high priest was a position that you bought with enough money. The temple had become about a show or hypocrisy. It was all about the here and now and the external. What Jesus was telling them is if you love money and stuff, you'll use people to get more. Because the leaders of the religious guard, the temple, because they were after money and stuff and power and prestige, they were using the people that came to the temple to get more. For that reason, Jesus shows up at the temple for one Passover, and he is disgusted that they've turned the temple into a marketplace. Jesus throws everyone out. Jesus could see that they loved stuff and money, so they were using people to get more of it. What we find in Scripture is that if you love people, you'll use money and stuff to help others. Instead of loving money and stuff and using people, we should love people and use money and stuff to help them. This principle is actually highlighted in a lot of Christmas movies. A Christmas Carol and A Charlie Brown Christmas, and even The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. Right? The end of the story is we recognize the Christmas tree's not that important. It's just that we get to gather together and celebrate with our friend Charlie Brown. The moral of The Grinch That Stole Christmas is that you can take all of the stuff from the people of Whoville, but they still have a reason to celebrate together. The moral of the story in A Christmas Carol is that you don't need another day to make more money. Rather, you should be celebrating and being generous to Bob Cratchit and his family. You see, in our culture today, we know that corruption and this love of money and stuff and using people to get more of it, that it doesn't satisfy, it doesn't fulfill. But Jesus takes it a step further. Because Jesus doesn't just give us the sentimental, moral, good-feeling version or good-feeling principle that we're not to use people to get money and stuff, but use money and stuff to help people. He tells us something beyond that. He says we're to help people forever. Give them something that makes a difference forever. And in his Sermon on the Mount, he was pointing at the eternal. Blessed are those that are poor, those that are meek. They will inherit the earth. He's pointing at the eternal. You see, the emphasis of the religion that the people had in that day was external, to look the right way and do the right things, and it was very temporary. It was external and temporal. But the focus of Jesus' message was one of internal change that lasts for eternity. That's what Jesus offered in the Sermon on the Mount. And so instead of focusing on the outside right now, Jesus was focused on the inside forever, and it was completely different and radical. Now, Jesus didn't say, hey, it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside right now. In fact, after he gives those opening principles in chapter 5, he starts to talk about some really important outward behavior. He talks about anger and lust and marriage and divorce and revenge and forgiveness, all in chapter 5. So when he gets to chapter 6, he's already on a roll and he starts to talk about money. And so he was getting right down to where the people were living. And when Jesus gets to the subject of money in chapter 6, he first speaks of hypocrisy, people who give to be seen by others. There's that external and temporary. He's not focused on that. He's focused on the inner and eternal. Then he speaks of prayer, and it fits with this idea because in that prayer, Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread. We're to count on the Lord to provide what we need. That's what we talked about last week. It's all God's, so no worries. It's all His. We have no concerns. After the passage that we're about to read in chapter 6, Jesus launches into this idea that the lilies of the field and the birds in the trees, they don't worry about where their next paycheck is going to come from, and they're taken care of. And if God can care for them, He can care for you. So in between all of this, and in this radical and powerful message, Jesus gives us some really important investment advice. And that's what I want you to look at with me this morning in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19. What kind of investments should we be making? Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? No man can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or you cannot serve God and money, or you cannot serve God and your stuff. This morning, I want to give you some investment advice. Some investment advisors will encourage you to do a mixture of high-risk and low-risk investments. Some will tell you that you need to invest for the long term. Some will tell you you need to invest for the short term, depending on your situation. Jesus says that there is a piece of investment advice that fits every one of us, and it's a long-term investment, the longest type of investment. It's an eternal investment. It's an investment that brings rewards, not in 60 days or 60 months or 30 years or when you retire. It brings rewards in heaven. He says, don't lay up your treasures here in this life, but rather lay them up in the next life. And he says, if you do that, you're laying up your treasure in a place where moth and rust can't corrupt. Now, in Jesus' day, there were two really main forms of wealth that you could accrue. One, money, which was predominantly silver, gold, coins of metal that don't have the processes that we have today, and so they could rust. Their money could be wrecked and ruined. The other form of wealth, some of us to this day still do this, was their wardrobe, their clothing. How many outfits they had. You see, back in that day, an outfit was pretty expensive. You didn't just go down to Walmart of Jerusalem and buy a new shirt. Somebody had to make it handmade. It had to be dyed. It had to be sewn. It was expensive. And so if you had lots and lots of changes of clothes, you were considered pretty wealthy. If you look through some of the stories in the Old Testament, you'll see that oftentimes when they wanted to give a gift to someone that was to give them honor, they would give them changes of clothes. That was a big deal. That was an accruing of wealth, to have changes of clothes. But moths could eat them and destroy them. And today, for many of us, this isn't something that we worry about because we outgrow our clothes on a regular basis, or the fashions change and we get new clothes, or we have mothballs in our closet. Jesus said, listen, your wealth that you've accrued, it can go bad, it can spoil. Or someone can break through and steal it. In our culture today, you don't worry about moths eating up your retirement. But there are thieves, corrupt people, who can wreck it and ruin it. Jesus was saying the investment that I'm talking about is one that will never go bad. It's a sure thing, and it's a long-term investment. And the investment that he was talking about was changed lives. Investing in changed lives is an eternal investment. See, that's how you invest in heaven, is in changed lives. There are only two things in this life that you can take with you to heaven. It's your own soul and the souls of people around you. It's your own life and the lives of those around you. Those are the only things you need to take with you to heaven. Nothing else. You don't get to bring any of the rest of this stuff. Even your most prized possessions, they don't go with you. They stay here and your family fights over them. That's how it works. So if you're going to lay up treasures in heaven, what are you going to do? You have to invest in changing lives. Jesus is saying to them, instead of giving all you have to becoming happy in this life and to accrue wealth in this life, you need to start laying up joys and treasures in heaven. You need to start laying up things ahead of you in heaven that you'll be able to enjoy there. And that's what we've been talking about this month, is investing in changed lives. That's what it means to be a part of the New Core Group, is to see God do an incredible work in your own life for you to grow, to become more like Him, so that when you get to heaven, there's more for you to enjoy, there's more for you to revel in, for you to serve and make a difference in other people's lives, so that when you get to heaven, you can rejoice that they are there. to give because you're investing in all of that taking place. That's what we're about. We are not here to build buildings or to fund a budget. We are here to invest in changing lives forever. Forever. Now, stay with me here. Every other gift we can give someone, it tarnishes or it fades. Moths can eat it, or rust can take it, or thieves can steal it. But there is one gift that we can give that moths cannot eat, rust cannot touch, and no man can steal. And that is the gospel. The gospel. We collected yams through Thanksgiving, and those were distributed to over 1,000 families. Not our yams. Thankfully, a lot of people were giving yams and other food at the rescue mission this past week at their gobbler gathering. You know what? People are going to need more yams next year. And they're going to need yams in 2018. And they're going to need food in 2019. But at the rescue mission, they were not only given a box of food, they were also given a gospel presentation. And if they got that with their box of yams and turkey, they don't need that again next year. It'll change their life this year. It'll make a difference in them this year. If they got a hold of the gospel, it's going to make a change in them forever. You see, the key to someone's life changing forever is the gospel. So the greatest investment that we can make is in the distribution of the gospel. The gospel. Sharing the gospel with others. There have been some major advancements in charity over the last few decades. Organizations focusing on doing work that is sustainable. For example, they go into a village, instead of building a new school, they hire people from the village to build the school, training them how to build, paying them as they work on it, so that when they're done, they take pride in it because it's something that they worked with, and when the organization leaves, those people now have a skill to build. It's something that's sustainable and will carry on. But there is no gift more sustainable. There is no gift more long-reaching than the gift of the gospel. When the gospel is planted in a heart, it brings about radical change. It makes a difference. You've heard someone say, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. When we give someone the gospel, God gives them eternal life. He feeds them, and He quenches that hunger for thirst and righteousness, that desire that their heart has had, that they haven't been able to quite place their finger on. He feeds them for eternity. See, the generous life is the good life because it puts our priorities in order. That's what we talked about at the beginning of the month. The generous life is the good life because it acknowledges that it's all God's. That's what we talked about last week. The generous life is the good life because it places us in the greatest cause in the world. Changing lives. It gives us the opportunity to make the best investment that we can make. Do you see that there is no better investment of your time or your ideas or your energy or your money than the gospel? Than to give people the message that Jesus has saved them from their sins, that He offers them forgiveness and restoration? Do you see that there is no greater thing that we can do with our lives than to join God in His mission to find the lost and mend the broken, restore the fallen, heal the hurting, renew relationships, fix families, develop marriages, renew people, care for the orphan and the widow. This is the gospel. This is what we're called to do. And there is nothing in the earth, nothing in the world that is greater than this cause. And when we're generous, we jump into the middle of this cause with both feet. And if that's something that your heart longs for now, just wait until you start giving. Because you know what Jesus said in this passage? He says, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. You see, investing in changed lives is not just an eternal investment, it's personal development. It changes the person who gives the gifts. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That is a powerful statement. You know what Jesus just said? Wherever your money goes, your heart's going to follow. Wherever you put your money, your heart's going to follow it. He says, if you put your money, you put your time, you put your energy, you put your investment in heaven, that's where your heart is going to be. You put your money where your mouth is and invest in the proclamation and distribution of the gospel, your heart's going to be in it. You know why I want you to give? I want you to give not because I want our budget to be funded. I want you to give because I want you to be all in. And when you give, you will be all in. Jesus said, where your money is, there your heart will be as well. You want your heart to be focused on things that truly matter? Give to what truly matters. Invest in what truly matters. Some of us, if we're honest, we were more excited about Black Friday than we were Thursday. Because our heart belongs at the mall. Because that's where our money is. Our heart is following our money. So I think you may be going too far. Look at verse 22. What does verse 22 say? Verse 22 says, if your eye be single, then your body is full of light. In other words, if your eye sees correctly, you'll see the world as it is. But if your eye is broken or your perspective is broken, you'll see the world broken. The way that we look at this life and the way that we look at this world is shaped by our perspective. And when we give, it reflects what our true perspective ought to be. This is God's. And I am honored and privileged to be a part of His message, His mission. If you've got a broken perspective, you'll see everything wrong. You'll approach life and ministry and family and relationships wrong. Jesus isn't saying that your life is messed up because you're not giving. Jesus is saying here that these things on the outside, like giving, they're messed up because something in here is messed up. That's the point of the Sermon on the Mount. He wasn't telling them, you need to change all of these activities and you need to change all these behaviors. No, he was saying your heart needs to be changed, and when it is, all of this stuff is going to change as well. This morning, I want you to really get a hold of this. This morning, I don't want you to start giving because that's what's expected. I want you to be changed. And I want the change that happens in your heart and soul to be reflected in your life in many ways, including giving. When we fail to be generous, that is a symptom of what is broken in here. When we fail to be generous, it is a symptom of what is broken in here. Your lack of giving is just one of many outward symptoms of an inward issue. It's a visible sign of an invisible sickness. When you get sick, what do you notice? You notice that you're sniffling all the time. Your nose is running. Noticing you don't have an appetite. Noticing that you feel clammy or you feel hot. You know what those are? Those are symptoms of the infection you have. And when there are these things in our life, these behaviors that don't match up with God's Word, including refusing to be generous with what God has given us, it's a symptom of what is wrong in here. And this morning, I don't want my message to convince you to give. I want my message to convince you that you need the gospel. And it'll change your heart. And giving, that may come along later. I bet it will. That's what Jesus is talking about. He's focused on the internal that lasts for eternity. And it makes a difference in all of these places. Still doubt me? Look at verse 24. Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Jesus is talking about money, but then he gets to the heart of the issue here. Who do you serve? Who do you trust? Who do you love? You see, investing in changed lives through generosity, it's godly worship. It's worshiping God. It's an evidence of the God that you worship. When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said to love the Lord God with all of your heart, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. If you get the first one right and you love God with all that you are, the second one kind of comes along with it. It's a whole lot easier to love your neighbor as yourself if you love God supremely. But it's hard to love your neighbor as much as you love you if you love you more than anything else in the world. See, if there's some hesitancy in us to be generous, if we struggle to part with money here in this life, even when we know that it'll make an impact and investment in the next life, that points to the issue in our hearts that we don't trust the Lord. Remember that quote I shared with you on the first Sunday of November? When you trust God with your money, you're finally trusting God. That really gets down to where the rubber meets the road, doesn't it? When we trust God with our money, it's a sign that we're really trusting God. When we invest in changing lives, we're worshiping Him. And when we refuse to invest in changing lives, we're worshiping something else. That's why in the worship service, when we take up the offering, I'll often say, this is still a part of our worship service. Worship doesn't end with the singing or end with listening to the message. It's a part of all of it. And when we give, that's an act of worship too. And Jesus says, you can't serve God and money. You're going to hold to one or the other. It's funny that in our country, what's written on our money? In God we trust. But I think that the biggest religion in America is money. I think the thing that we trust in the most is money. I heard an economist talk years ago about how they can actually watch how the economy's doing by watching the inverse of what's happening to religion in America. When the economy fails, church attendance and engagement goes up. Why? Because there are people who come to God when they run out of money. Can't serve both. And sometimes we only come to God when money has failed us. Last week I said God's not going to give some of you any more than He has because He knows you wouldn't be generous with it if He did give it to you. This week I'll say God's not going to give you any more than He has because if He did, you'd just trust in money instead of Him. Some of you are a pay raise from devoting yourself to money. But see, God's not worried about the amount. And God's not worried about the pay raise. He's worried about your heart. God doesn't want your money. He wants your heart. And apparently they're quite tangled up together. Apparently money really digs its claws in deep in our lives and in our hearts. The reason I've been talking about this all month, like I said, it's not because we're about to build. It's not because we have a budget shortfall. It's not because there's some nice thing that we need to buy. It's because we want something for you. And I believe that you were made for this. I believe that you were made to be a part of the greatest cause on the planet, to reach people with the gospel. I believe that you were made to give. Eugene Peterson wrote about watching two sparrows. They were caring for the little chicks one spring. He could see them, kept an eye on them through the spring as they warmed those eggs and the eggs hatched. And they went and they got food and worms and fed those little chicks. And the chicks began to grow and they developed, got stronger. And then one day, little mama sparrow pulls the chick out onto the limb. And the chick makes his way down the branch, and then the mom shoves the chick off the branch. Why? Because that's how she taught it to fly. Now, here's the thing. That chick could walk. That chick had talons that could grab a hold of the branch well. It was doing absolutely fine. it could have continued walking and holding on to branches for the rest of its life. But that's not what it was made to do. It was made to fly. And that must have been quite some moment, right, for the chick. When it's out on the branch with mom, who has taken care of it and fed it worms, and now suddenly mom is shoving me to my death. And the earth is hurtling up towards the little baby sparrow, and then suddenly he's soaring, and he's flying, and he's doing what he was made to do. I've talked about money for 4 weeks, and it's maybe been painful. And maybe it felt a little bit like me pushing you off a ledge. But I believe that you were made to soar, and you were made to make a difference, and you were made to give, to impact the lives of other people in your family and in your community. I believe that you were made to build the church our neighbors will join and our children will lead. I believe that you're here for that purpose. And I believe that you can do it uniquely in a way that nobody else can. Like a sparrow was made for flight, you were made to make a difference. A.J. Jacobs wrote a book, 1 Year of Living Biblically. And what's interesting about that is that Jacobs is an agnostic. He's not sure that there is a God, and if there is a God, he doesn't know that he can be known. But he wrote this book about 1 year living biblically. He spent an entire year living according to the Old Testament. And he realized that if he was going to do this completely all out, tithing, giving 10% of his income away, was going to have to be part of it. So he and his wife had several long conversations about this. Finally, he convinced her. And they set up these gifts to give, and they were going to give away 10% of their income that year. And this is what he said. I got a little nervous before I hit the send button, but after I did, I felt good. And I'm agnostic, but I think I felt God's pleasure. I felt something like a higher sense of purpose. It felt like something I should have been doing all my life. You see, even an agnostic can bump into what his calling in life is to be a blessing and make a difference in the lives of others. Look around the room right now. You know what you're surrounded by? You're surrounded by people whose God's grace has changed through the ministry of this church. That's what's all around you. People whose lives are different because someone gave and served. And I'm inviting you to be a part of that. Walk down the hallway. On your right, there's going to be a toddler class full of kids. The reason I didn't post a picture of the toddler class earlier is because if you'd seen it, we'd never get anybody else to serve in toddler ministry again. There's so many kids in there. On the left, there's a nursery with babies in it. Go on through to the gym and up the stairs into children's church. And there's 20 or so kids learning about Jesus today. What it means to be in spiritual warfare, to face temptation and say no to the devil and say yes to God. I'm inviting you to be a part of that. I'm inviting you to make a difference. And I know that giving might sound impossible to you. Like a sparrow learning how to fly, but I believe that you were made to do it. And when you give, you'll feel this sense of purpose. You'll be making a difference. You know, this morning I shared with you the greatest investment that you can make. And I know that for some of you that sounds like a major step. So let me share with you a few steps that I think maybe you could take as those first steps. First of all, you're here this morning and you've never given to our Christmas offering. In 2016, this December, we're going to be collecting an offering all through the month of December. We'll have all Christmas offering envelopes in the back. You place your offering in that, it'll go to that. You mark on your envelope if you want it to go to the Christmas offering, it'll go to that. It's going to be for Free Will Baptist Family Ministries. It's a group of ministries that reaches out to unwed mothers who are considering abortion. It reaches out to foster children. It would be a great cause for you to give to. And so I want to ask you to take that first step to consider giving to the Christmas offering this year for the first time. Maybe the next step for you is that You need to commit to giving something regularly in 2017. Maybe you're not ready to tithe, but you're going to give something regularly. We're going to give $20 a week. We're going to give $50 a month. We're going to make some gift. Even if it's only $5 a month, we're going to give something regularly. It may be that you're here and you say, we're just not a place where we can do that. Our finances are such a mess that we can't. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to commit this morning that in January on Wednesday nights, we're going to have a class, Dave Ramsey material, Life, Money, and Legacy. You're going to be a part of that because you want your finances to be in order so that you can make the next step. Or it may be that here this morning, the things that I've covered so far, God hasn't spoken to you about. Let me challenge you to do this. Would you take the challenge of 2017 to tithe for the first 90 days? Could you do that? I believe that if you'll take that challenge, that God will bless you. We're going to sing one more verse of invitation to give you an opportunity to ask yourself, what is the next step that I need to take so that I can give and make the greatest investment? Brother Karen.